In these next couple sections of lecture, I'm going to turn to talking about some of the models and theories that attempt to organize the various factors that impact people's health and health behaviors. And so we're going to start off here with a couple cognitive models. And so these are ones that really focus on the beliefs and attitudes that we have about health. So before I get into that, I just wanted to go through these will be sort of all of the ones that we'll cover in these next few sections, we'll be starting with these cognitive models, talking about the health belief model, and then the theory of planned behavior. That one might ring a bell if you've taken other courses, and we'll cover that a bit. Then we'll turn to social influence models and talk about normative influences generally, and then specifically within the diffusion of innovations model. Then we'll also talk about the theoretical model. As the name suggests, this one cuts across different theories. And then next class we'll talk about motivational approaches to understanding engagement in health behaviors. And so again, we're starting here with these cognitive models, so I'm going to launch into that now. So the first one I want to talk about is the health beliefs model. This one of the nice things about it is its name sort of tells you what it is. This one focuses on the beliefs that we have about health and seeks to intervene by changing those beliefs. And so the way that this model works is that if we want to predict whether someone's going to engage in a health behavior, we need to concern ourselves with their beliefs, particularly their beliefs about the relative threat that this particular negative health outcome has for them. And so if the health behavior, for example, is quitting smoking, then their belief about that in terms of how likely that is to lead them to get sick and how bad that's going to be, how severe that's going to be, is going to predict their engagement in that health behavior. So here they would say someone who perceives that they're very likely to get lung cancer and that would be really bad and debilitating is going to be more likely to quit smoking than someone who perceives that they're, that happens, but it's not going to happen to me, and even if it did, it wouldn't be that bad, I'd treat it. So they're going to be less likely to engage in that health behavior. That's what this model is predicting. It also takes into account the beliefs about how effective it's going to be if they did engage in this health behavior. Would this actually reduce that perceived threat to their health, right? So is quitting smoking actually going to now reduce their risk? And how does the benefits of that offset any other risks or costs? So in the smoking example, this would be there are people, so potentially you might believe that, if I quit smoking, this will really cut down on my risk of lung cancer, and even though that will be hard to quit, the benefits of that are really strong, and so that's going to lead the person to be more likely to want to change their health behavior. Whereas someone who says, yeah, I could quit, but I've smoked for so many years, that's not really going to make a difference, right? They perceive that this isn't going to be a very effective health behavior to reduce their risk anyway. And or someone who says, yeah, that might be healthy for me, but the costs of that are going to be too great. That's going to be too hard. Maybe I'm worried I'm going to gain a lot of weight, or this is going to be too hard because my friends all do it. And so this is the benefits and risks are not, that ratio is not in favor of changing my health behavior. Just a few more pieces to this model. They say that the beliefs that you have about the threat to your health can be influenced by what they call cues to action. So these might be your symptoms, right? I mentioned before that if you're having a sore throat, it might remind you, keep in your conscious mind the threat of potential lung or throat disease, right? And so this could be a cue to action to cut back on smoking. Other public health service messages, these are cues to action, right? They might be reminding you of these threats, of these risks, and how susceptible they are and how severe this is going to be. This is what many health campaign messages attempt to do. We'll talk more about why these are sometimes not so effective in a later part of this lecture. Advice from others might also increase your perceived threat. And then there's also factors, and so those are the main things that this model looks at, right? So these are really all about your beliefs about health. So we can think about an example that uses this model to try to intervene in health behaviors. And so this This study looked at mammogram use, and so how many women got screened for breast cancer. And this is an important health behavior to look at because catching breast cancer early can be very, very treatable. But also getting a mammogram is not a fun thing to do, right? This is not something that people take lightly, right? They basically have to crush the breast between these really strong plates in order to get a good image of everything that's going on inside of there. So this is not a fun, pleasant experience. This is not just nothing, right? But it is an important thing to do once you reach a certain age. And so the goal of this study was to increase the number of women who were getting mammograms for early breast cancer detection. And so they used the health belief model to do this. And so the design of this study is that they gave half the women this intervention that's based on this model, and I'll show that in just a second, and then half of them got no additional information. They just were exposed to whatever messages they would normally be exposed to in their daily life about the need to get a mammogram. And so again, using this model, what they did, so the health behavior here that we're looking at is getting a mammogram, and so they gave them lots of information in the intervention condition on the vulnerability and susceptibility of breast cancer, right? So all the scary stats, they gave them all of that information. And they also gave them information on how effective a mammogram is and the advantages of early detection. And so that was their intervention. And so what they found was that this intervention indeed was effective. So women who had that intervention, 30% of them got mammograms in the next 3 months and 50% in the next 6 months. And so certainly this is not everyone, but this is significantly more than people who were in the control group. Only 10% of them in the next 3 and 20% in the next 6. So that is a drastic increase here. And so this model, we're going to critique it a little bit, right? So it worked well here, but there are some major critiques of this model. So some things that are strong about it are that it does introduce these useful constructs. Previous models didn't think much about our beliefs about health and how that mattered, that there is a subjectivity to that, right? So we focus on the fact that it's not just the fact, but it's your belief about this and how at risk you are and how effective you think this health behavior is going to be. And so it does identify these points for intervention. But there's also some key weaknesses, right? It assumes that our behavior is rational, that if we just know that this is a bad outcome, that we're going to weigh these costs and benefits rationally and mathematically and come up with a rational response. And I think already that we don't do that all the time. In fact, most of the time. And so there's lots of processes that might lead us to defend against the threat of this health information that we're at high risk, and so we'll talk about this a bit more in the health messaging section coming up. But certainly we know that our behavior is not fully rational. You're psychology students, right? You've learned this before. It also assumes that people have the skills to alter their behavior, and this is less relevant in the mammogram example because you just have to show up and go. Right? It sucks, but you don't have to have any particular skills. Whereas for things like quitting smoking, right, that's a hard thing to do. You need a lot of strategies and support. Potentially you need a medication to help support with the cravings. And so this model doesn't give an intervention there, right? It doesn't have a place for intervening with providing more skills and resources. It also ignores much of the social context of many health behaviors. That's not really modeled in this model, the social influences that might be occurring here, besides the fact that it does include advice from others being a cue to health, but it doesn't include influence of social norms or anything like that, which some of the other models that we'll talk about do. The next cognitive model I want to talk about is the theory of planned behavior, and this is a theory that is used a lot in health psychology, but is really a more general social psychology theory. I teach about it in my attitudes class as well. It's really one of the dominant theories there. But relevant to health, we can think about the outcome that we're interested in is this behavior change, right? Engaging in this positive health behavior or not engaging in this negative health behavior. And the key factors that this model looks at are our attitude towards the behavior, so how positively or negatively we think of it. I'll explain a little bit more about how they look at attitude in the upcoming slide. They also look at the the subjective norms. So what are people around you doing, and are you motivated to do the same thing? And then it also here looks at your perceived behavioral control, which is a similar piece that we saw in the health on belief model, but this is really almost the same as your self-efficacy towards this. So how much is this under your control to be able to change this health on behavior? How much are you actually able to do that? And so these things, they all interact with one another, of course, right? The norms might influence our attitudes might influence our perception of norms, and also all of these factors interact. Your perceived behavioral control might interact with your attitude, right? You might have a different attitude if you think you can't do anything about it than if you think you can. But that's less important here than what we're really interested in is how these factors together inform your intention to engage in a behavior. And then this model argues that so you form this intention to engage in the behavior, and then that predicts your actual engagement in the behavior. There's also a direct pathway here from perceived behavioral control to behavior change, and that's to account for the fact that our perceptions of behavioral control are at least in part based in reality. And so some things just are more or less possible to do. And so there is a direct path in terms of things that are more possible to do. You're more likely to change that behavior. But there also are individual differences in the perception of how much control we have over that behavior. And so that can predict behavior change through behavioral intentions. So an example of a behavior that might have a direct impact on behavior change because it's hard to control is, for example, nail biting, right? That's one that you might have very low perceived behavioral control around, and you're right. That's a pretty automatic thing to do. It's a real habit. It can be hard to break, and so that could have a direct effect on your inability to change that behavior. So again, the goal of this model is again, it's a very rationally based model. It's about, you have your attitude, you have the norm that other people are engaging in, you think about how much control you have over this. These together predict your intention to engage in that behavior, and then that predicts your behavior change. Just delving into these factors just a little bit more each. So the attitude itself towards the behavior, that's determined by two things. It's determined by the expectancy, so the expectancy that this behavior is going to lead to a particular outcome, a positive outcome, right? So is this going to do something good for you? So it's going to be a combination of the value attached to that outcome. Is this good or bad, the outcome, and how likely you expect that outcome is going to occur, right? So if the behavior is if the attitude towards the behavior is smoking, then it's the expectancy that behavior is going to lead to the outcome of lung cancer plus the value attached to that outcome, so how bad you think that's going to be. So that's how your attitude towards the behavior is formed. The subjective norm is also determined by two things, right? This is influenced by the normative beliefs about how others behave and how they expect you to behave, and so this is influenced by what people around you are actually doing, but also by your perceptions of that, right? There might be biases in which others you look to inform your behavior and your perception of what other people are engaging in. We tend to see and recognize more instances of people engaging in behaviors that align with our beliefs than we than we recognize people who don't. But so normative beliefs are important here, as are our motivation to comply with those expectations, right? So the normative beliefs are going to impact you either way, but do you want to go along with them, or are you going to rebel against them? And so both of these are going to be important in determining the impact of the norms on your intentions to change your behavior, and then ultimately on your behavior change. Perceived control, again, this is the third of the sort of three key factors that are influencing intentions and behavior change. And so perceived control is important because if you don't believe you're going to be able to engage in the behavior, why would you form an intention to do it, right? And so this is a really important thing to look at. And so again, as I mentioned before, perceived control can also have a direct impact on the behavior to the extent that it reflects actual control with some degree of accuracy. And so if you can substitute, so to the extent that this is really assessing how much you actually have control over this, and that's going to be important, right? So say, for example, your behavioral change goal is to exercise more, but you really don't have that much control over that because your job schedule means that you really don't have time for that. There aren't any gyms open for you to be able to work out in at the time that you are off from work. And so, yeah, you have low perceived control, but that's also related to real factors. And so that accounts for the direct effect. Okay. So here's our model again. Right, so we talked about what goes into each of these. I just put them in here. Right, we've got the attitude towards the behavior, so your expectancy that the outcome is going to occur and how good or bad you think that outcome is, the subjective norms, so the normative beliefs of others around you, and your motivation to go along with those, and then your perceived behavioral control. And again, those impact your intentions to form the behavior and the behavior change itself. So evaluating this model, right, again, this has a lot of strengths. It introduces, again, some really useful constructs, particularly this idea of perceived behavioral control, again, very closely related to self-efficacy, if you've learned about that previously. And so this is an important addition here. Many interventions can focus on that, trying to increase people's perception of control over this behavior change. And so it also addresses the influence of social norms, which I'll talk a little bit more about in the next section of this lecture. But it does include this in the model. And so again, like all of these, it does offer points for intervention, right? We can intervene at the level of these social norms. Again, I'll talk more about that. We can intervene with trying to increase behavioral control. We can also try to intervene at the level of attitudes and try to change people's expectancies about how likely an outcome is to occur and the value that's attached to that. But again, there's many weaknesses with this. This assumes that behavior, again, is rational, that we're going to carefully weigh all of these options and then form an intention. And then it also assumes that our attitudes and our intentions predict behavior. And if from other courses, you may know that this is very often not the case. Again, I think exercise is a great example. I have very many times formed the intention to exercise, made amazing plans, mapped out runs, come up with lifting plans, but not followed through on that, right? And so this really can break down at that link between the intentions and performing the behavior. And so we're going to need other models to help look at that. And I think the motivational models in particular that we'll talk about next week can give us some good insight there. So I'm going to end this section here, and then we're going to pick back up with social influence models, and so talking more about norms, and then the trans-theoretical model as well.